And beneath all of that, again, which I appreciate, is the fact that there are some uncomfortable truths about our relationship to food that is premised in this vernacular around addiction. And as somebody who is long time in recovery, this is the lens that I kind of approach all of these things. And it's something that I think is under-addressed in this conversation about not just a healthy diet, but how we transition to a healthy diet. Because people, we're emotional beings, and it's less about the information than it is about trying to help people figure out how to traverse that tricky, sort of tightrope between old habits and new habits. And by kind of couching all of this in those uncomfortable truths about our addictive relationship with food, I think is really powerful.
Well, the reality is, humans evolved in a very different environment than the one we live in today.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in an environment of scarcity. So most humans actually didn't live to reproduce. They didn't pass on their genes. They died from predation. They died from starvation. A few survived, our ancestors.
Uh-huh.
Our ancestors were the winners.
Yeah.
They got enough to eat. They didn't get eaten. They lived long enough to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
And our bodies and our minds were perfectly designed for that environment of scarcity. So now, human beings being the innovative creatures we are, we change everything. We change the environment we live in dramatically. And now we don't live in that environment of scarcity. At least most of us don't. We live in an environment of abundance. And although we're perfectly designed for that environment of scarcity, this environment of abundance can trip us up, and it does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's responsible for the systematic overeating that people do that leads to the obesity, that leads to the metabolic syndrome, that leads to the vulnerability to infectious disease and the chronic degenerative diseases, the cardiovascular disease, and many of the cancers. And so that reality is why it's so difficult for people to adjust to the idea that they just can't eat as much of whatever they want and get away with it.
Yeah. It's almost as if, if you're a heroin addict or an alcoholic, everywhere you go, everybody is a heroin addict or an alcoholic. There is no safe space, right? We've normalized our behavior and our respective relationships with food to such an extent that the radical notion is to step outside of that and do something different.
2/3 of people in industrialized societies are overweight or obese. If you're not fat, you're abnormal.
Right.
If you go to a physician and say you're significantly overweight and you've lost a bunch of weight, the physician doesn't immediately think, oh, you must have adopted a whole plant food diet and begun an exercise program. Their differential diagnosis is, this could be colon cancer, eating disorder, or drug addiction.
They pathologize a healthy choice.
Well, the only experience they have of people losing weight and keeping it off is when they've got cancer, they've developed an eating disorder, or they're a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not even in their expectation that people are going to actually get well. You go to a physician with most of the diseases of dietary excess, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, and they're going to tell you, look, you're going to be on drugs the rest of your life. If you do what I tell you, I promise you, you'll never get well. You'll be sick forever. Because it's not in their expectation that people are going to actually recover their health.
Yeah.
Because they're not addressing the actual reasons why they're developing the problem to begin with. They're not addressing the causes of the problem.